I just have to sit up. Let me sit up. Let me sit up. I need to sit up.
Relax. You're going to be all right.
No.
I'm here to help.
No, I need to sit up. Mike, where's my cousin Mike? Where'd Mike go?
I'm sorry.
No. Oh!
Hello, my name is Rick Ballard. I'm a captain with the San Diego Fire Department. Often we're the first ones who arrive at crashes where there are victims. Many of these crashes are avoidable, the result of someone's poor choice. You're about to hear a powerful story of a friend of mine. I want you to listen carefully because I want you to make the right choice. I'd rather not be loading you into the back of an ambulance or another unfortunate victim for a ride to the hospital or even worse, the morgue.
Hi, my name is Mark Manion, and you might notice that I'm in a wheelchair. And I don't want you to feel sorry for me being in a wheelchair. I always like people to know that because I have a great life. I'm married to a wonderful woman, Priscilla. We have 2 darling daughters, Robin and Rochelle. Have a nice business that we operate out of our house, attend a really neat church, and life is just going really good for us. One of the things I also like to mention is when I go around and speak, I never have to look for a place to sit down. So I have my own chair right with me. That's a big advantage right there. Anybody here been to Disneyland? Had to wait in line for a half hour, 2 hours maybe on a really hot day. When you're in a wheelchair, they take you and the whole party that's with you in the back exit. You get to go right to the front of the line. It's killer. You just go from ride to ride to ride. And I like that idea so much that I thought about starting another business, that of renting myself out to people going to Disneyland. But the truth of the matter is, I wouldn't choose to be in a wheelchair. Somebody else made that choice for me about 29 years ago. That time of my life, I had graduated from Madison High School in Claremont, graduated with academic distinction, was a 3-year varsity letterman on a tennis team, played on a CIF championship soccer team. I was a left back, was an avid downhill skier, racquetball player, loved sports. That was a really big part of my life. When I went on from high school, I went on to San Diego State University where I started working on a degree in marketing and business. I had a full-time job. I used to work the graveyard shift at a 7-Eleven Mini Mart. I would work from 11 o'clock at night till 7 in the morning and scoot on out to classes. I also had a full-time girlfriend, so life was very busy for me during those years. One of the other things that I liked to do was long-distance bicycle riding. I'd taken several long trips previously, the longest one being from San Diego all the way up to San Francisco. And one day I got talking to my cousin, my best friend Mike. So Mike, how would you like to go on a long-distance bicycle trip with me? I said, yeah, that sounds like fun. So in January 1974, we started planning a trip. And by August of 1974, we just had this killer trip planned out for us. We were going to ride our bicycles all the way up through California, up to Chico in the northern part. And then once there, we're going to do some inner tubing down the Sacramento River and some backpacking at Mount Shasta. From there, we're going to ride our bicycles over to Boise, Idaho, where we had another friend that lived, and she was going to tour us around there for a week. And from there, we're going to ride our bicycles all the rest of the way up to Ely, Minnesota, up by the Canadian border, where we had made arrangements to purchase a canoe. Then we're going to go up into Canada and do some canoe camping for about 3-4 weeks. Somehow, when that was all done, we were going to try and find a different way to get back to San Diego. We didn't think we'd want to ride all the way back. August 4th, 1974 rolled around, and we were ready. We had custom built our bikes up from scratch, hand-picked every part out, had the touring bags we needed, water bottles, pumps, spare tires, everything we needed for this extended journey. Kissed our girlfriends goodbye and said, hey, we'll see you in about 4 months. First day we rode, we made it up as far as Laguna Beach and camped out in a park overlooking the ocean. That was up until about 2 o'clock in the morning. About that time, there were some flashlights in the face. It was a couple of police officers. We missed the sign that said you weren't allowed to camp there, so we got kicked out. Got a really early start for our second day. Second day, we made it up as far as Malibu, and we just camped out right on the shore and the beach there. Next day, we headed inland, went over the mountains, and ended up in a little town called Maricopa over on the other side in the valley. It gets hot. Boy, the sun came up over the mountains that morning. You started frying inside your sleeping bag. So we started riding pretty early again that day. We rode up till about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. About that time, temperatures had reached 103 degrees in the shade, which was really hot for distance riding. So we just happened to be passing a community swimming pool, which looked awfully nice. And we spent the rest of the afternoon swimming. We were going to ride that evening to make up for lost time. About 5:30 or so, when it was closing, we got back on our bicycles and started riding. Around 8 o'clock, it started getting dark, so we turned on the lights. We had the kind of lights that go around the upper part of your arm. We had reflectorized tape that went across the back of our saddlebags. We had reflectors in the spoke, and we were wearing light-colored clothing. And the road we were traveling on was just straight for as far as you can imagine. About 9:30 or so, we were getting tired, so we wanted to find a place to camp. So we pulled off to the side of the road. Didn't look too good. There was like a drainage ditch that went along the side and a bunch of little gnats and flies that didn't look too comfortable for a night's sleep. So we got out a map and a flashlight, determined that the next town was about 15 miles away, about another hour's worth of riding. So we got back on our bicycles and started riding. I don't know how many of you have done any long distance bicycle riding, but it's a really good sport. It's good for your cardiovascular system. It's peaceful. You can stop anywhere you want. And all you hear is just the constant cranking of your pedals, and off in the distance in this particular area, there were oil rigs, and you could hear those big hammers going up and down, cranking up the oil from underground. But every 10 or 15 minutes or so, some lights would come up from behind, and you watch them vanish off into the distance. So that was up until about 10 o'clock at night. And about 10 o'clock at night, there was some lights approaching from behind, and all of a sudden there was a crunching noise behind me. I just barely had a chance to glance over my shoulder, and my bicycle started buckling right beneath me. I used to always think, as fast as my reflexes were and as good a shape as I was in, I wouldn't be able to back my feet out of the toe clips fast enough if I had to react in a split instant. And the toe clips is like a leather strap that went over the top of your foot. That way you could pull up and push down when riding. It made for a more efficient use of your energy. Sure enough, I was trapped to my bicycle. Next thing that happened is both of my ankles snapped. Then the right front fender of the car ripped into the back of my right thigh and ripped it open right down to the bone. As I was flying back across the hood of the car, which was doing in excess of 65 miles an hour, the force actually caused my skull to come off of my spine. The skin stayed attached, but my skull and my top vertebrae got lifted apart from each other. Then I crashed into the windshield, shattered it, ripped open the back of my left shoulder, and about 230 feet farther down the road, 2/3 the length of a football field. Hard hit. Was broken up, bleeding to death. I'm laying on the side of the road, and it's amazing I was still conscious. I was thinking, I don't believe this is happening to me. I was only 19 years old. At 19 years old, I thought I was invincible. I didn't think there was one thing in life that could take me down. I was laying on the road, and I wanted to pinch myself, but I couldn't move. And I'm going, wake up, this just has to be some kind of a bad dream. Finally, I realized this really was happening to me. This was real life. I yelled out for my best friend, my cousin Mike. I go, Mike, help me. I go, Mike, help me. Mike, are you all right? And there wasn't any answer. You see, as bad off as I was, my best friend was not so fortunate. He ended up going under the car. And at his funeral, which I wasn't able to attend because I spent nearly the next year in a hospital, they ended up having to have a closed casket. How could something like this happen? Well, there were 4 guys that got into a car. There was a driver, 23 years old, right front passenger, 19 years old. The 2 fellows in the back seat were each 17 years old. They were out having a little bit of fun. Unfortunately, their fun included some drinking and driving. Bad choice, a really bad choice. And I'm a strong Christian and believe the Bible is the Word of God, but even if you don't believe that, it has some really strong words of advice, some good words of advice. It says, do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Debauchery is like a moral lapse. You start doing things that you normally wouldn't do under your right frame of mind. Things like drinking and driving, spousal abuse, just a myriad of problems in our culture are drug and alcohol related. It also says that wine is a mocker, beer a brawler. Whoever is led astray by these is not wise. In other words, that person is making a foolish choice. And that's what happened there. It was a foolish choice. It was destruction. My best friend was killed. You'll never get to meet him, and he was one of the neatest kids in the world. And then me, I was wiped out. I'm laying on the side of the road, and we'll get back to there, and I'm still bleeding to death. It didn't look good. But there was a house that was close enough away that heard the sound of the crash, ended up calling for help, got an ambulance out to me, and then they got me back to the hospital. It took about 45 minutes. By the time I got to the hospital, I went into respiratory arrest, stopped breathing. They revived me again. I'd stopped breathing. They revived me again. It was a seesaw battle all night. Next morning at 10 o'clock, my mom back in San Diego got a telephone call while she was at work. And it was the hospital. And they said, you better get up here. Your son's been in a horrible crash. My mom goes, well, do I have enough time to drive? They said, no, you better take a flight. We do not think your son will live that long. And so my mom ended up calling the church, got people to start praying, and it went on prayer chains around the country, and flew up to Bakersfield to see me. And when she got there, I was still alive, a miracle in itself. But I was paralyzed totally from the neck down. I'd become totally paralyzed. Ended up having to, that week, they ended up having to hook me up to a tracheotomy. They gave me a tracheotomy, had me hooked up to an air machine that used to do the breathing for me. And I was a mess. I was up there for 9 days. They still didn't think I was going to live, but I was in good enough shape. They wanted to transport me down to a hospital in San Diego. And their closing conference at that hospital was, I was going to be a C3 quadriplegic, irretrievable, which means I'm Christopher Reeves for the rest of my life. I'm totally paralyzed from the neck down, and not a good prognosis. They ended up sending me down to a hospital down in San Diego. I spent the next 5 months in one hospital there where I went from 165 pounds down to 95 pounds. Ended up having to fuse my spine back together, put a halo cast on me with a metal band with bolts screwed into my skull, and I cast from here to here. They put you on a striker frame and you're looking at the floor for 2 hours, and they flip you over, you're looking at the ceiling for 2 hours. They flip you back over and you're looking at the floor for 2 hours. Life, it was like a pancake. It was really tough. Couldn't do anything for myself. I couldn't move my arms, couldn't move my legs. I was totally paralyzed. In fact, everything had to be done for me. Toileting, food, had to be tube fed or spoon fed. To give you an idea, if you had a scratch on your face, you say you were itching or something, you couldn't reach up and scratch your face. You had to call for a nurse. They'd come in and they'd scratch your face, and you go a little higher, and finally they'd get the right spot, and you'd be all relieved, and they'd leave, and wouldn't you know it, like a couple minutes later, that same spot would start itching again. Tell you could drive a nurse, and that's the way it was. Life was tough. Another doctor at another hospital heard about my case, because it's really rare that you survive your skull coming off your spine like that. And he ended up taking on my case. My mom ended up contacting him. And they found another problem called hydrocephalus, where fluid was building up on my brain, causing me not to be able to think clearly. In fact, I'd almost got to a vegetable-like state, and which my wife still argues about today sometimes. But they ended up putting in a shunt, which goes from my brain down to my heart, and it drains fluid away from my brain. Then it went from, well, it looks like he's not going to live, to, well, looks like he's going to live, but he's not going to walk again. And then, anyways, 5 more months of rehabilitation at Sharp Hospital, and I actually could walk. I left walking in parallel bars or using a walker. I tell you, praise God, because that was so cool, because I never should have survived, and here I was walking again. I got to a point where I can walk an 18-hole golf course, pulling my own clubs. My balance wasn't great, and I had to walk with a cane, but I could do that. Then I ended up getting married, and had two daughters. About 3 months after we had our second daughter, I was walking into a restaurant to pick up some pizzas from my wife and a friend. When I opened the door, the bottom of the door caught a mat on the floor, which caused it to arch up. My left foot hit the arched part of the mat, caused me to stumble, and I went head first into a counter. Ended up breaking my neck again underneath that long fusion because the one vertebrae had really deteriorated from trying to make up for all the top ones. And I'm laying on the floor and I'm going, I don't believe this is happening to me again. Totally paralyzed from the neck down again. At least I was initially, and some of the feelings started coming back, but I still lost a lot more. And it was tough, but that never would have happened to me if the first crash wouldn't have happened to me, because I was in excellent shape, I had good balance, and I wouldn't have had that sort of problem. I would have been able to catch myself. And so when I go around and speak to people, that's the reason I speak to them, is because I want you to make good choices. I want to help you make good choices, choices that you can live with. Because if you hurt somebody like me, I have to live with the consequences of those actions for the rest of my life. And those make life a lot tougher. I still enjoy life, but it does make it a lot tougher. You know, and it was also hard for the guys that were in the car. I've written a book called Unfinished Miles, One Man's Unthinkable Journey. It came out when I was doing the research for it. I ended up calling the guy and got a hold of the guy that was the right front passenger. His number was still good from the police reports from some 18 years ago when the crash originally occurred. And he ended up coming down to San Diego to meet with me. It took about 6 months. And when he met with me, my wife met him at the door, and when he saw me in a wheelchair, tears started rolling down his face. He started crying. And we talked for about 3 hours, and he told me a horrible story, that for the last 16, 18 years of his life, he's had horrible nightmares. A couple years after that, we ended up going up to Los Angeles and met with a 17-year-old boy who was now 40 years old, and his wife. And I had to go to the bathroom about halfway through the meal and started to leave, and to go to the bathroom. And the minute I started leaving the table, my wife said he started crying. That's how much it's affected their life. And he said he would do anything to take back that day, anything to take back that day. And those guys live in what I call is the prison of your mind. You know, the choices you make, you have to live with the consequences of that, and you knowing what you have done to somebody else. It's a hard thing to deal with. I got a letter from their mom this last Christmas, and she said they still suffer with it. Still suffer. They're still in that prison of their mind. The driver of the car did go to prison. And anyways, that's the reason I come around and talk to you, because I want to save you the problems of having to go to prison or having to live in the prison of your own mind, guilty over what you've done to somebody. So what are some options that you can do? One of them, don't drink. That's a great option right off the bat. But if you're going to drink, think before you drink. Make sure that you have like a designated driver, somebody that you know for sure that is not going to be drinking, somebody that will get you from point A to point B safely. Another option is, if you're out drinking, call a friend, somebody you know that isn't going to be drinking or doing drugs or anything, that will be able to get you home safely. Another option is make sure you have enough money for a cab, and then make sure you take one if you start drinking. Another option is just stay where you're at. You know, rent a room or stay over at the house where you're at. These minor inconveniences are small when you compare them to you becoming a statistic or you wiping somebody else's life out, because then you would have to live with the consequences of that, and you don't want to do that. You do not want to go down that unthinkable journey. Thank you very much. Please don't drink and drive.